Let's start. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this panel. I'm Sebastián Vidal. I run operations for a local startup with global outreach called Raincoat. Previously, I was the CEO and co-founder of a local startup accelerator with global impact called Parallel 18. So today it's the only global startup accelerator in the island, created in 2015. So we work with many startups from Puerto Rico, but also many startups from Latin America and the US as well. It's a program that currently helps companies from all over, but specifically North, Central, and South America to expand in different markets. And one of the main issues and challenges that we saw there, and one of the ideas of this panel due to that experience, is that there is a very important challenge to overcome when you're starting up, and that is, scaling your company globally from your home country. So in Latin America, as you know, it's a very fragmented country with different currencies, different regulation. It's not unified. It's a bit of a hassle. So to create a startup in Latam, you need to really have a thick skin, and the ones that are doing it and the ecosystem that support those startups, they really have some interesting experiences and playbooks that are willing to share, and that is exactly what this panel will talk about. So I have some great speakers today with me. To my left, I have Juan Pablo Ortega. Juan Pablo's experience is very interesting. Juan Pablo lives in Puerto Rico, by the way. He's Colombian. He was one of the co-founders of Rappi, the unicorn. I don't know if you have heard about it in Latin America. Very rapid startup growth in the last couple of years, and with many learnings and impact. And out of Rappi co-founders and employee, many other startups were created, which is extremely interesting as well. It's like the Rappi mafia, they call it. And currently, he's the co-founder of Uno, which he will tell us a little bit about that. Alison Kern is the managing partner of Morro Ventures. Morro Ventures is the venture capital fund here in Puerto Rico. They also invest in Latin American and actually global startups already, so that she has a very interesting perspective on working with diverse startups and also making them global. And last but not least, Luis Fortuño. Luis works with probably one of the leading legal firms behind the biggest and most successful capital raises between the intersection of Latin and the US, behind most of the most relevant Series E, B, C, we'll say, Luis, in Latam. So definitely another set of insights that he will come up with. So that being said, I would like to start with the capital. I would like to start with Alison, with share a little bit, about what do you see in startups early on, and what are the things that you ask them or you require for a startup or those founders in terms of scaling those startups globally?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So to begin with, it's just about market size, right? Unfortunately, as Sebastian had mentioned, the US is pretty homogenous. You can be based in Boston or New York or San Francisco, and you have 360 million people within the same jurisdictional law code, dollar-based, et cetera, that you can target. Latin America, unfortunately, does not have that benefit, right? But it has other opportunities because there's now barriers to entry. You can be a Colombian firm. If you really know Colombia, it's going to be more difficult for a Peruvian firm to enter Colombia, et cetera, right? So pros and cons. However, it's all about being able to address an appropriate market size that you can get your company to that, that quintessential $1 billion kind of market size and be able to grow sufficiently. That's the venture capital model, right? I'm speaking from the perspective of a venture capitalist that wants to target a company exit at 25x plus, and it's a home run and everyone's happy, and et cetera, et cetera. Again, challenges, as Sebastian had pointed out, right? There's borders, there's barriers, there's regulatory issues, and jumping from Colombia to Peru to Mexico, et cetera. there's different currencies, there's political risk. But once a company is able to circumvent or supersede those barriers, the world's their oyster. From my perspective, right, interestingly speaking, when we were getting into companies in the US, we would look at an ecosystem or like a competitor set and we would say, oh, there's only 12 companies, right, trying to solve this particular niche solution. That has a lot of space to grow. We're going to be fine. And if we pick the 5th player in this market, we're going to succeed. In LATAM, what I've realized from being here now 7 years is maybe there's 1, 2, 3 players and like the world's their oyster. Again, a number of kind of speed bumps along the way, but I think that it's underappreciated how much opportunity there is in LATAM. It just takes a little bit more work to overcome those barriers in the beginning.
Well, yeah, listen, and just a follow-up quick question around that. When entrepreneurs comes to you and they pitch their companies and their ideas, I'm pretty sure there's some, I don't want to say, but there's some that says, like our market will be this specific country, our market will be Puerto Rico, for example. What would you say, how would you approach that presentation,
Sure.
that pitch?
So I would say it's not always bad, right? But I'm not the right investor for that idea or that company. I think it's easy to think that venture capital is the only capital solution. It's not. But an entrepreneur or a founder needs to understand that a venture capitalist also has a mission or a goal to get a company at a massive exit, right? So maybe if you do want to just target Puerto Rico, you want to grow to maybe $5 million in revenue, that's awesome. Maybe look for a bank loan, look for a different investor, don't target a venture capitalist. A VC, we're looking for a company that can scale large. And unfortunately, since markets are small in LATAM, that means it internationally, regionally, etc. A good tenant is single platform multi-tenant. So a good tenant is single platform multi-tenant. Basically building a ubiquitous solution that is flexible, not overly tailored to one particular use case, that can be applicable to your local market as you're learning and scaling at home. But then when you say, okay, now I understand Puerto Rico, I want to go to Colombia, I want to go to Mexico, the platform's transferable, right? You're not redesigning or re-architecting everything from day one because it's just not viable or feasible. So to have the mentality, to Sebastian's question, what would I tell a founder, is from day one, think, can I target a number of different use cases, markets, consumer or customer groups with this single platform without having to make massive changes?
Super. Oh, thank you, Alison. Juan Pablo, first of all, I would love for you to share a little bit of what UNO does. It's super interesting. And then you have experience expanding in Latin America, but now with UNO, I know that you're expanding to multiple countries. So you have to have a playbook. If you don't have a playbook, like share what you have. But definitely some great experiences there.
Perfect. So when we started Rappi, day one, we started in Colombia, but we knew that Colombia was too small to be able to raise capital. So week one that we kind of started putting the application together, we saw that Mexico was much larger than Colombia, that we needed to start in Mexico and in Colombia. So the funny story is that I had a Mexican ex-girlfriend, and they were like, hey, you have some relationship to Mexico, you should move to Mexico and start Rappi in Mexico.
Part of the playbook, right?
Yeah.
22-year-old Colombian moved to Mexico to start what is going to be the biggest delivery company, and it was really difficult. But we started learning a lot on like what not to do. I think what we did in Mexico was exactly what you're not supposed to do when you're launching a company in Rappi. And before we move into UNO, I think it's super important to explain how I ended up kind of building UNO. And we expanded from Colombia into Mexico, then we expanded into Brazil. Today we operate in 9 different countries. And the biggest issue that we had when we were expanding, well, there were a bunch of issues. We have 3 different kinds of customers. We have the restaurants, the merchants, we have the end customer, and then we also have the couriers. And you had to build a customer base of those three different ones. And it's the chicken of the egg problem, because the restaurants don't want to onboard if you don't have customers, the customers don't want to use the product if you don't have couriers, the couriers don't want to onboard if you don't have end users. So you have to incentivize with a lot of money the three of them so they can come in and be the first one to try the platform. But as I started we launched and I started doing deliveries because we didn't have enough couriers, so I had to get on my bike and do deliveries. I asked people, like, what is the biggest issue that you're having with the app? And they were like, pain. Like, I put my credit card, it doesn't work. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of crazy. So I started getting involved with payments. I created the payments and the fraud team. And this is an issue that we had for 7 years. So in 7 years, we had a huge payments team. We were spending so much money in doing payment integrations around Latin America. And even though we kind of fixed an issue, the next week we had a new issue. So you had new payment methods, you had new fraud systems, you had new ways people were trying to defraud Rappi, and it was like a never-ending problem. And that was the reason why I started Uno. So Uno is a global payment infrastructure company. We're basically connected to payment processors around the world, and we help large companies or companies that operate in different countries to have local payment connections so they can have the best experience for their users, which is key as you're moving international. So for example, if you launch an application in Colombia and you don't have Nequi, which is the most used wallet, you're gonna lose 50% of the time. And that's what we do. Talking about the playbook, in Rappi, we had a bunch of issues that Alison mentioned, because we thought that it was going to be easy to just copy-paste the Colombian app in Mexico, and it turned out that there were a bunch of differences. Some of them really big, and then some small ones that messed everything up. So a good example, in Colombia, the decimal point is a comma. In Mexico, the decimal point is the thousand separator. So when we launched the app, people didn't understand if it was like 1,000 or it was... The other thing is that Colombian currency, so $1 is 4,000 pesos. So when we copy-paste the app, things look really weird because they were used to have really long numbers. So you have all these little details that if you don't think about it since day one, you start having issues. And one that created a bunch of issues is that you think that currencies have only 2 decimal points, but actually in many countries you have 3 or 4. And these are things that they seem super stupid, but when you create huge databases, adding an extra decimal point, basically you have to re-architecture everything. So when I started Uno for 7 years, we made so many mistakes in Rappi on what not to do, that I wanted to build a global company since day one, which when you tell investors you're going to be a global company, they get scared because they say, no, you have to focus, you're thinking too big. It's kind of funny. It's kind of, you think it's the other way around. You think that you have to go to investors and pitch the big dream. Most of them you have to, but as you start going down, people want you to have a clear plan. And when you tell them, I'm going to launch a company in 5 different continents and we're going to process in 80 different countries, they're like, you're crazy, can you please find one country and make it work? And we did. We launched Uno in Latin America. Our first customer was obviously Rappi, which was the worst customers to have, because you think that you have the relationship and it's going to help. No, they wanted to make it really difficult for me, so it was hard. But then we also launched with McDonald's, Avianca, and we started expanding. Because we built a company with a global mindset and we knew all these little things about decimals, about how things work, for us it was actually really easy to expand. So we started in Latin America, then we moved into the Caribbean. We started processing payments here in Puerto Rico. I never thought we were going to do it because I didn't thought we were going to have customers here, but McDonald's is one of our customers here. So we integrated into Evertech, we attached a mobile. And then our own customers, and this is super important because we were able to just go ahead and go to Asia and go to Africa. That was my plan, but the reality is that you need to focus. And what we focused was on our customers. And we started asking our customers, like, where else do you work? Where are you having problems? So one of our big customers is InDrive, which is a mobility app. So it's like an Uber, but for emerging markets. We went to meet with them. And they were like, hey, you guys are working great, but you are our LATAM orchestrator. And we're like, what does this mean? So no, we're looking for one in Asia. And I'm like, don't look for anyone. Give me the opportunity to prove that we can do it. They were like, okay, you have 3 weeks to have 10 connections in Indonesia and Thailand. The next day, I was already doing the integration for Indonesia. In Thailand, we launched, and it was super successful, and today we process payments for them in Africa, Middle East, all of Asia. And this started to give us that kind of way on how do we grow. So we started growing in these different markets, but with a clear plan on what integrations we needed, with clear revenue. So we launched Indonesia, we were doing like 500,000 transactions per month. We launched Thailand, we were doing 1 million transactions per month. And this gave us a clear understanding on that path of internationalization. Today, we process payments in 80 different countries, and it has been basically just following what our customer wants, just focusing 100% in what this customer wants. And the playbook, there are like 50 different playbooks. In the integration side, we learn LATAM is complicated, and the way you have to integrations in the different countries are completely different. But it's funny enough that the way you do integration in Thailand or in Vietnam is super similar to the way you do it in Ecuador or Peru. So we're able to replicate the way we did these integrations around the world. Sometimes there is a language barrier. ChatGPT has been extremely useful in helping us break that barrier. And for us, and I think you touched on this point, but Rappi had a lot of complications because you had to be on the ground. You needed to hire people, you need to have entities. This is something that used to be really complex, but today you have companies like technology companies that help you set up local entities really fast, that help you create these global bank accounts so you can receive funds around the world. These were things that in 2015 when we started Rappi was impossible. And then we have companies that you can connect to, and that you can process payments in Nigeria if you want without doing any extra integration. So leverage those new tools, leverage those new technologies, and you're never going to get it right. You're going to be changing the playbook. Each new country that you open, you're going to have issues. It's impossible to know everything. Like today, we operate in 80 different countries, and we're doing an integration in the 81 country, and we're finding new things that we're learning. So those playbook evolve as you move, and this is especially true as you move into new continents and new things happen.
Super. And I'm going to do a follow-up question and kind of a segue to Luis, but you raised a significant amount of money recently, and you mentioned that investor point you in a direction that you not necessarily agree or wanted to go. Like, what's the relation now with those investors, and how do you make them or convince them to follow what your goal was, right? Or
with results. So we told our investors that we were going to get to the 1 million ARR in 7 months. We failed. We did it in 8 months. And we were really disappointed, but they were really impressed that we did it. I think we were extremely ambitious, and it's this kind of thing that we're like aiming to Mars, and we got to the moon, and getting to the moon was amazing. But the only way we created this trust with investors was, I think, first we're being really ambitious and they start getting afraid. But if you're able to execute your plan and show them you're able to actually kind of put the numbers where your mouth is, things start to change. And that was the main reason why. So we did a pre-seed, and the pre-seed was a lot of money, but it was just based on my experience. It was based on we didn't even have a deck. Like, we started doing a deck and it didn't look good, so we didn't show it to investors. But what we had was that we talked to customers and we explained what we wanted to build, and we started building an MVP and we showed it to them, and the customers were like, this is great. So when the investors were like, hey, like, I'm not sure if this works, like, call my customer, like, talk to them, and they're gonna tell you. And I think that was the first part where they say, okay, you kind of know what you're doing because your customers say that you know what you're doing. So you're building something that people want. And after that, you put these crazy targets, and two things that happen. Like, you get to them and people are impressed and they keep giving you money, or you get close to them and people give you money, or you're completely the other way, and then it start getting complicated because you have to look for new investors. And for us, it has been being able to overpromise and deliver. Well, we would like to under-promise and over-deliver, but we have overpromise and deliver. And that has helped us kind of build this trust with the investors for them to keep us, giving us money. We have been able to, look, we raised money in the peak of a crazy period where you were able to raise money without any due diligence, without decks. We raised like right at the peak. and we wanted to like go crazy, like don't worry about the burn, like don't worry about revenue, we're gonna make big companies, it's gonna work at that point. And 2 months after, everything changed. And investors were like, no, what is your revenue? Like, what is your burn? You have to take care. And we had to completely kind of pivot our idea. So we first say, let's get customers and then we're going to get revenue. And we completely changed that. We started getting revenue from every customers. And it got more complicated. It's really easy to give something for free. If you start charging people, it gets more complicated. But I think the just being able to grow the company at a time that is much more difficult is much better, because in Rappi was kind of the other way around. And we use that tailwind to grow, but then when things get hard, it gets really, really hard. We built, at a time that investors were pulling back. Like people were getting super worried there were going to be a recession. Like people start worrying. They don't want to buy software. They're like, no, we don't need you. We're looking to survive. And we had to change how we did everything to make sure we were able to survive in the hard times. And now that things are getting better, we're just moving along, because we had to pivot our ideas and how we work and be super disciplined in being able to get really good revenue from day one. And it has been super helpful.
Excellent. So thank you for sharing that. And Luis, I think this there's maybe two parts of the question. One is like, again, if you're raising money and you're like from Colombia or from Puerto Rico, Ecuador, or Uruguay, whatever, what would be those considerations to actually expand from that home country to all the other countries or bigger markets, right? In the context of you raising, but then operationally, right? Like if you're gonna be doing business in elsewhere, what are those considerations as well, no? when you're starting up?
Sure. There's one thing that Juan Pablo I forgot to mention about why Juno has been so good, is that they use us as their outside counsel. So he forgot to say that. No, but in all seriousness, I think the most difficult conversation that we have as attorneys with founders is that from day one, you need to understand what's your target market. And the reason why I say that is because if your target market is US, then you have a different corporate structure. If your target market is LATAM, then there's another structure. And it's difficult to get in a call with a founder and trying to envision where the company is going in the next 5 years, right? So I think having that, trying to understand that from the beginning helps you to create a structure that benefits not only the company but also the investors. And the reason why I say that, for example, if you look Viva Real, which was a company that was sold about I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, they incorporated as a C corp. And then they only operated in LATAM. They sold for around more than $500 million. They had to pay $100 million in taxes in the U.S. Just because they had a C corp. So I mean, it's very important, to understand the implications, that the corporate structure has in the development of the company. So rule number one, is trying to understand which market you're going, and then after you figure it out, I will say spend around 80% of the time with companies in LATAM. I usually spend out of that, 70% on the company side. So I have seen, all type of companies that have done all type of mistakes. But I think the number one mistake is that they incorporate as a local entity. And then they raise money, through saves or convertible notes, in that local entity. And then whenever they get serious about getting funding from investors, from VC, the VC says, there's no way I'm investing in that local entity. You need to do a flip, either to a Delaware C Corp, Delaware LLC, or to do a Cayman sandwich. And just to do that, for example, from Mexico, there's a tax issue, and it just gets harder. So I really always recommend founders, from the beginning, establish offshore, and then it depends if you're going to do U.S. or Cayman Islands or UK or Canada. It depends of if you're going to target the U.S. or another market. But yeah.
And I want to add something to this because it's super important. like I was the kind of person that wanted to save money at the beginning, and then
Always want to save money
It
from the
was more
beginning.
costly at the end. Look, I think you have to overinvest legally at the beginning, and there are so many things that we miss when we did Rappi in terms of IP. Where is your IP located? Where are you issuing your invoices from? You can save hundreds of millions of dollars if you set up things right from the beginning. Like to Luis's example, there was a mistake that we did on how the entities between Colombia and Mexico were connected, and it cost us like something like $200,000 in taxes that we had to pay because we just didn't have one piece of paper that we had to sign 3 years ago. So I think making sure that you kind of touch all the different points. There are so many things that you think are not important, and then they become extremely important. Like understanding if the name of your company is registered or registering that name in different parts of the world. At the beginning, doesn't cost you much, but then it can be a huge liability, and these things tend to come up when you sign a term sheet and you're ready to raise money, and there is like one small issue that you could have fixed before. So just be super careful and overinvest at the beginning, making sure all the different parts are covered.
And one more comment on that. So, I mean, my investor comrades are going to roll their eyes when I say this because I'm not playing on their team right now. But get your own counsel. Don't rely on your investor's legal counsel. Sometimes, like you said, you want to try to save money early on, and you have your VC who already has their legal team, and you're using that legal team to ask the questions. That legal team is batting for the investor, right? So they're going to tell you what the investor wants. Oh, the investor would prefer you to have it in Delaware and la la la. But like you said, like he had said, Viva Real, it made no sense for them to be a Delaware C corp. So make sure you unfortunately overinvest in your own legal counsel to begin with. Ask your own questions, get your own advice, because it'll save you money in the long run, even though it'll be expensive up front.
Your investors are not your friends.
They'll pretend. They'll pretend.
No, and honestly, I think that's a good point. I remember a company we invested together from Argentina, and they were not only money you spend a lot, it's also time, no? Like it's
Yeah.
time consuming, changing. You mentioned local investors. Those local investors that invested in the local company, you need to transfer them to the holding company. It's a whole different story, right? So I definitely see that. I think there's many ways. I mean, if you're a startup, you need to create creative in many sectors of your startup, not in the legal framework, I'll say. What would you say is the framework that companies from LATAM, founders from LATAM should follow? That would be, because you mentioned, sometimes if you're a Colombian startup targeting Colombia, or don't do Delaware C Corp, or do, what would you say is like, this is easy, these three things?
So if you're gonna be a LATAM company that is not gonna operate in the US, I will say Cayman Sandwich, which has a Cayman holding company at the top, then you have a Delaware LLC in the middle, and then you have the operating companies at the bottom. It gives you a lot of flexibility at the time of a sale. You're not exposed to double taxation, which you are in the C Corp, and then at the same time you will have your IP, you will pay your employees in the operating company down at the end. If you want to maintaining this structure, it costs money, of course. There's a maintenance fee in Cayman around $3,000. There's attorneys in Cayman that you need to have, attorneys in the U.S., probably local attorneys. So there's a lot of expenses, involved in that structure. So if you want to save a little bit of money at the beginning, and you want to raise either safe or convertible note, then maybe having a double LLC and then having the operating company at the bottom makes sense. And then whenever you're gonna raise capital in terms of equity, then you can flip, that LLC either to a C corp if you're gonna focus in the U.S. or to a Cayman if you're gonna focus anywhere else but the U.S.
And that's what we did with Luis. We started with an LLC, we raised money, and then when we had money, we had to pay him a lot of money to flip it. But at least you had to get the money. People focus too much on putting the Cayman together, but you shouldn't do that. Start with a plain vanilla LLC, and then you can flip it when you have the money.
So one more thing to add from Juan Pablo is that at Wilson Sonsini, we have been around, since 1960s. We're around 1,000 attorneys around the world. Our business model is to start with companies from the beginning and to grow with them all the way onto the IPO. So we have, of course, a lot of AI tools, that help us, incorporate companies, from day one. We have fee caps, we have fee deferrals, so we understand, that companies from the beginning don't want to spend the money, but at the same time, we understand, that they need to be incorporated correctly in order to not face, larger issues down the line. So we do have, programs that, help, our clients in order to, to be flexible with them, but at the same time to be incorporated and correctly. So yeah, we're attorneys, so we're going to be expensive. I'm not going to say we're not, but we're reasonable, we're flexible, and and definitely if you're not going to come with us, hopefully you are, choose someone that understands the market and understands the players, because it does helps having an attorney that knows what's market, what's not market, because it really helps the client not only in negotiating a financing round but throughout their corporate governance of the company.
And to commend my two co-panelists, it was smart of Juan Pablo to pick a law firm that had an international presence, and it's good for Luis to be part of a law firm that has an international presence. Because if you're going to build your company across many jurisdictions, if you have a local lawyer, it's so much more difficult to say, if you have a local lawyer in Chile, to then find somebody in Colombia, like, ay, mira, I want to expand my fintech to Colombia, I don't know the licensing agreement. Your local lawyer in Chile is not really going to know. So if your plan from day one is to be a global or at least a regional company, pick a lawyer that also has the profile that can help you across that exposure.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally on point. In our case, it's the same thing. It's like we save a lot of time and money to just having the experience. It gets tricky when taxes at the end, like you still need to get tax. But I think I will echo what Alison was mentioned, that you need to do your own work. Always educate yourself, and so you can be prepared to having these difficult meetings with investors, with legal firms and others. So last question, coming back to the business side of things, what will be, again, as I asked Luis, very practical tips. You have an entrepreneur that is in front of you, ready to launch elsewhere. One or two tips, Juan Pablo, Alison.
Okay, start. So number one, find local investors in the key markets. We knew, for example, Brazil was going to be big, so we have two main investors in Brazil. They help you with legal help, they help you with customers, they help you finding employees. Like our investors in, for example, Brazil are the one helping us finding a country manager, helping us find the people that we need. So having those local investors is super helpful. The same thing as we move into Southeast Asia, we found an investor in Singapore who actually helped us pick our head of APAC. So having those local investors is key. Number two, don't be afraid. I think if you're starting a company, you have to be willing to jump, and don't be afraid if it's too high. It's always going to be too high, so don't worry. And this means that many times you do too many, market tests, and you're asking investors and you're asking too many people if you should go into one country or another one. And a great example of this, there is this podcast that you have to listen to. It's called Acquire, and they tell the story about companies. And they just did one with Starbucks, and the Starbucks CEO wanted to go into Japan, and no one else wanted to go. Like the board was telling him not to go. The investors were like, you shouldn't go to Japan. And he trusts his God, and he went into Japan, and Japan is one of the most successful countries for Starbucks. So completely ignore what people tell you. If you have a good feeling, trust it and go and test it. Great companies are born of testing and failing a lot, but some of those failures become the greatest success. So don't be afraid to make mistakes as you expand.
So I obviously agree wholeheartedly. Find a local investor. Find other entrepreneurs that you respect that are also operating in those markets. Ask questions. Entrepreneurs are great resources for each other. And then keep your playbook. Like Juan Pablo had mentioned with Rappi, right? The mistakes that they made entering each new market, remember those mistakes, right? Because they're going to come back to haunt you. So every time you enter a new market, it's going to be different, but there's also going to be lessons that you can attribute, right, to each new entry. So have a clear plan, and especially coming from like the investor's perspective, we're always going to ask, well, what is going to be the startup cost, right? Or what are you going to spend your money on in order to enter Mexico or enter Indonesia? have a clear plan. You're going to deviate from that plan, and that's the expectation. But at least be thoughtful enough. Don't just take, handfuls of cash and say, we'll figure it out as we go. No, be thoughtful, because I've never seen the we'll figure it out as we go be more successful than having at least some guidelines as to how you're going to target the new market.
So I will say, I definitely agree. As I said, try from the beginning, to have people around you, either, counsel, friends, they understand the market, and try to help you from the beginning, to do things right. That's number one. Number two, and I saw a lot with Juan Pablo in the financing round that we did with them at the end of last year, is that whenever you're doing, a round or a safe, just ask questions. There's, for example, in the equity round, there were, more than 20 documents that we signed, and there's, there's more than 500 pages, and there's a lot of provisions that are, difficult, that are strange, like you're signing, to that, and you're gonna, obey to that. So make sure you understand, what you're signing, what you're gonna encounter, because that's, after you do that, after you sign that document, there's a new relationship that is controlled by that with the investor. So, make sure that you're not afraid of asking those questions, even though if you think you're, they're dumb, the time to ask them is before you sign. Once you sign, you need to obey by that. So just don't be afraid and ask the questions.
Super. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so I think the only thing that I would add is that probably in your home countries, you have international networks that you can tap into. Here in Puerto Rico, we have Parallel 18, we have Endeavor, for example, and those have international scope. Those are great places for you to connect with people because, Juan Pablo is mentioning that you can reach out to this investor or your connections if you have in other countries. Well, accelerators that are international have that benefit, or Endeavor that are global networks. You can tap into those networks and it will help you a great deal. Of course, you need to put your effort into those organizations and they will give you all that. It's not like easy just to get in. They will probably be selected, but it's a great way to get international access. So I think we have a couple of minutes for questions if you have. You can raise your hand if you have some questions to, please.
Juan Pablo, this question is for you. I'm intrigued as you were thinking of raising capital and perhaps raising capital from different markets or different types of investors. How did you come to terms with different expectations of how much money to raise and what the valuation is, so that in the future you would not be, doing a down round on, relative to early investors?
Look, I think valuation has to do, there are kind of like two factors. One is kind of timing, because the multiples that you see today compared to 3 years ago are completely different. If you're raising money today, you shouldn't have any issues, because I think we're at the lowest point possible of multiples and the terms that we're getting. When you're looking for an investor, I mentioned, you start looking for different regions, but the reality is that you have to have that main investor. I think for us, normally US investors and big investors tend to give you better terms than local investors, so you should leverage that and try to get terms from this big VC and then have the local VCs follow. Many times they're waiting for the local one to give you terms, for them to give you terms, and that's when it starts getting complicated. But number one, you have to be aligned in terms of the valuation. And if you have a valuation in mind, or you have a number that you want to keep, so for example, let's say you have some terms from before and you don't want to go below that. So let's say I'm going to make something up, but you don't want to raise below 200 million, like be super honest with investors. Investors will normally tell you like, hey, I cannot get to that until you get to X amount of ARR or until you do X, Y, and Z. But I think the big problem is that sometimes entrepreneurs are afraid to ask, and you have this big elephant in the room that no one wants to say a number, and then they throw a number, and then you're disappointed, and then the investor is disappointed because you're disappointed. So having that clarity with the investor, like, look, we're going to raise money, and it depends kind of on how much leverage you have. So don't wait until you have 3 months of runway. That's, I think, one of the biggest mistakes people make. They wait, they are super eager that they're going to get to this goal, and they just wait for the runway to get to the lowest point to go raise, and that's when you don't have any leverage, and investors get really afraid. So plan ahead, make sure you have enough runway before you raise money. And if you're in a different situation, just be open. And I think having that openness with the investor on what are your expectations help being able to get to the valuations and terms that you want. And then you think you're done, and then they send you term sheets that you have to review with Luis Ro, and it's another
The best experience he had.
Yeah. That's another super important thing that I learned with Luis Ro. Investors, well, depends. Some send these crazy term sheets of like 30 pages. Not normal. Normally it's 2 pages. And when we receive the 2 pages term sheet, we're like, we're gonna sign, and Luis Ro like, no, we're gonna add 10 more things. So it went from 2 pages to 5 pages. And I was like, no, Luis, so this is getting too complicated. You're being a lawyer, like, stop. And he's like, no, you have to make sure that everything is clear. And it was the best advice that we got, because as soon as you sign the term sheet, you lose all the leverage because you have exclusivity. And if things are not clear, you think that it's going to get easier later, it's going to get much more complicated. Because here you have, 2 pages, maybe you have 15 terms. When you're negotiating documents that are like 25 documents, that are like 500 pages, you have so many things to negotiate. So you go into a meeting, you're like, okay, we have 100 points, and you have to go one by one. So making sure those big things, board, what things can the board do, what do they want, what are they expecting, what things can you decide, what things can invest, so you think that you have to wait for that later? No, make sure they're in the term sheet.
Any other questions?
This question is for, first a comment. I did a raise a few years ago, and we went, like you mentioned, overboard in terms of legal, accounting. We were doing $1 million maybe a year, and I think our lawyers took advantage of us, because for a company that is doing $1 million, we had like 6 different entities in 3 different countries, plus the accountants of that. So that definitely made a hole in our company. It was a big lesson learned. But yes, I do agree, it helped us out in some areas. But if the growth is not there, it was just an overkill. And at a round of 1 mil, spending under 50K in lawyers, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, you need a new lawyers, but yeah.
Talk to me after, please.
The second, this is a question more for local investors. In terms of Puerto Rican companies growing outside of Puerto Rico, comes to mind maybe 2 companies that have successfully done it. What's happening? What do we need to do to change that?
Yeah. I think Sebastian can also
No,
chime in.
don't put me in this spot.
Being part of Parallel 18 for so long. So in my 7 years of experience being here, right, I think that it's the mindset from the beginning. Puerto Rico, the beauty and the detriment to being Puerto Rico is that we're US, we're not US, we're LATAM, we're not LATAM. We speak Spanish, we speak English, and Spanglish a lot of the time. It's unique, right? So it's not as easy for, say, to go from maybe Mexico to Colombia. It's more difficult to go from Puerto Rico to Colombia, Puerto Rico to Mexico, because we're different, right? So to point to 2 companies that are from Puerto Rico that are scaling successfully, which is Raincoat and you sit here. Anyway, to use those examples, right?
We're Puerto Rican.
Yeah, exactly. From the beginning, it was a global mindset, right? So their product wasn't tailored to be Puerto Rico. There wasn't an overlay of saying we have to make sure it works here. A hurdle, too, of being based in Puerto Rico or certain sectors is that there's additional regulatory overhead here than there are in other markets, which makes it more difficult. So for Raincoat, for example, it took Jonathan, which is the CEO of Raincoat, about a year to get his license to operate from the commissioner here, which is commendable that he did it. But had he maybe just gone to Mexico, Colombia, and been an infrastructure play as opposed to like a local policy carrier from the beginning, it might have been easier. So what I would tell, entrepreneurs here are amazing. And what I like, as bad as it sounds, what I tell them is think outside of Puerto Rico from the beginning, right? Try the market, but don't bash your head against the wall if you're not making it work. Get some revenue from Puerto Rico, but if early on you're generating more from Mexico, Colombia, somewhere else, cool, right? And Puerto Rico benefits more from having success cases from a regional perspective than like really trying to become ingrained in the local market. it's an island. You're never going to scale beyond a certain limitation, right? So from the beginning, be global or regional.
What about you, Sebastian? I know you've had a lot of experience.
See, well, no, I will say so. It's something that I'm still, working my mind with it. I haven't cracked the code. I think one thing that I realized working with Parallel 18 and now with Raincoat is that there's a big percentage of the companies that use technology, they participate in Parallel 18, that they never, the founders didn't have the mindset to go for VCs or whatever, and they were okay with targeting the local market, and they're going to be fantastic companies anyways. And from our side, we were like just pushing for like the venture capital and the unicorn, and you have to grow, grow, grow. And at the end of the day, it's like they really wanted to create a $1 or $2 million company, and that's fine. But then the flip side is like when you have that 10% of the companies that really like you see the potential there, and they are not doing it well. That's like you need to work with the founders and understand the markets, and there's a mindset thing and there's a culture thing. But today there's a lot of infrastructure actually to help you. Like one of the things that Raincoat did great is like leverage on the global remote working landscape. No, Jonathan is a guy that really vouched for remote working, and like from the get-go, we had one person in Colombia, we have someone in the US, we have someone in Europe, with someone in the Caribbean, in Mexico, and so we had that flavor of we can do this everywhere. Like there's no point of doing it here, and that's something that it's a mindset thing as well. Also, the other thing that plays in Puerto Rico a lot is like, because it's so unique and different, like people think that doing business in Puerto Rico will be the same as doing it in Mexico or in Colombia, and it's way different. And when they found that, they said, "No, this is not for me," and they come back and they start doing business in Puerto Rico. So, but I haven't cracked the code. I think for me it's just being working with Jonathan, the CEO of Raincoat. He has this global mindset from the beginning. We haven't even questioned that, and we decided to set up the company globally from the get-go.
And I think as an entrepreneur, like Puerto Rico is the best place in terms of incentives, on tax structure. It has so many benefits. You're part of the US, but you're not part, but it gives you, like, you can operate a US company from here. You can have employees in Colombia, which is 2 hours away, and you have a couple like Connect that has a big, a bunch of Puerto Rican companies have a lot of employees in Colombia. So if we are able to change the entrepreneur mindset, this could be a huge hope. And I think it was the idea of Product 18. I think we're going there because there are just so many tailwinds. There are so many things that can help you as an entrepreneur to be able to scale and to have an unfair advantage against everyone else. So if you have a company in Florida that is paying 20, 30% taxes compared to what you will pay here as you export services, you have an unfair advantage. And you have so many different things. Having a local team here compared to other places, you're going to have an unfair advantage. So I think if entrepreneurs have that global mindset and they're able to take on those unfair advantages, they're going to be able to have, we're going to have a bunch of global companies from Puerto Rico.
Yes.
Luis, do you ever see instead of a Cayman, a Puerto Rican language as a policy for economic development opportunity?
I mean, I wish. In order to get there, you need to get all VCs, all big investors in LATAM on the same boat. We're trying right now to get all investors in a different structure on the same boat, and it has been very difficult because we do understand that the Cayman sandwich costs a lot of money for companies. So we're trying to develop a different structure internally at Wilson and trying to sell it, to all investors, Kazakh, Valor, Monashis, everyone that is big in LATAM, and to be honest, has been difficult. So hopefully at some point, but yeah, there's a challenge. I'm not gonna be honest, and people don't like the unknown. I'm gonna be very honest. Whenever we have a client that receives a term sheet and they're incorporated and locally, like the number one point is like you need to flip immediately. You need to flip, and you need to flip like yesterday. So I need to flip to Cayman. So it's very, investors in LATAM, are very, they know what they want. And so, I wish, I was born and raised here in PR, And I moved around, 1, 2, 3 years ago. I'm gonna add to what they said to your question. When I moved to PR, I was like so excited. I was like so pumped. Like like I'm gonna be able, like I'm boots on the ground. I'm gonna be able to help, founders in PR. Like I want to do it pro bono. Like I just want to see the ecosystem grow. And every time I met with someone, it was like, no, because I want to operate here. I'm like, but why here? Here's your test. You test. This is your beta. Get out of PR. PR is so small. You're capped at 3 million people. Get out. Go to Colombia. Go to Mexico. So I think that's yeah, it echoes what everyone has said. But yeah, I think that's the main reason why companies have not been able to scale. I'm sorry that I diverted a little bit,
But you can have we can call it a tripleta, where you have the Delaware, then you have the LLC, and then under the LLC you can have the Puerto Rican entity, and then the Puerto Rican operating entity can take advantage of incentives. So yeah, we should start selling the tripleta.
I'm gonna call you after.
I love the concept. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you guys for joining the panel. Thank you.